Welcome to The Real News. I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Baltimore. On the day of President Trump's inauguration, about 230 people were carted off by the police and arrested for allegedly rioting. Others like Dylan Petrohilos weren't arrested that day, but charged later with conspiracy charges surrounding the allegations that they had planned a protest where a couple of windows were broken. This case has become known as the J20 case. This week, the first group comes to trial. Petrohilos is with me in the studio today, along with Isaac Dalton, an organizer for the Industrial Workers of the World Union, who prosecutors say is also involved in planning the protests. Okay, this is a massive legal case involving over 200 defendants. Can you tell me who's involved?
There were about 230 people arrested initially, and about 13 medical personnel and journalists and legal observers had their charges dropped pretty soon after we were indicted. There were about 3 months after the initial charges of felony riot were levied against 214 of us. The prosecutor amended the indictment and charged everyone with 7 additional felony charges, including inciting a riot, conspiracy to riot, and several counts of property destruction. Some people have since taken plea bargains, but the vast majority of defendants have chosen to go ahead to trial, and I think there are 191 of us still awaiting trial. This week, the first 7 of us are going to trial, and they are largely people who were either journalists or medics or had some other sort of role in the protest like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, this group is a large group. It consists of people that's been allegedly charged with rioting, conspiring, etc. But you weren't arrested, Dylan, until several weeks later. Why are you included in this?
So I was indicted at the end of April when the superseding indictment came out, along with 2 other people who were also indicted that day. The reason why people like I got indicted was because of alleged planning and the beliefs that I was behind the protest that day. On inauguration, that march was kettled off. Police were incredibly violent that day. The Real News Network actually came out with much of the actual data that we have around how actually violent they were, right? And this was in response to some minor acts of vandalism and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I understand they invaded your house and took material. What kind of materials did they take from your house?
So the first thing that they took was an anti-fascist flag that had been flying outside my front door since the election of Donald Trump. That flag represented to me kind of like show of like resistance to this idea that fascism could get normalized in the United States. Apparently having anti-fascist politics has become, in 2017, a fairly controversial political stance to have, right? There's been as many articles condemning Antifa as there has been praising anti-fascism and like the belief that like fascism should be opposed. Along with that, there was numerous political magazines that were taken from my house as well. Now, these aren't things that ended up in my actual discovery, but cell phones were taken, a copy of In These Times was taken, a copy of Nation magazine was taken, a banner that says "Kiss Capitalism Goodbye," and stencils and different personal artwork that also were taken.
Mm-hmm. So, like you say, a month later, and they invade your house, they look at materials that you have a right to have, political material. Do you think this is a political persecution?
100%. You know, you can hear on the audio, for example, them talking, MPD specifically talking about, you know, on the radio talking about the anarchists, right? And them setting up trap. You know, this is definitely them setting up political prosecution in the era of Trump. And this prosecution comes down, you know, the DC DOJ, the Department of Justice, the district attorney's office specifically, is a branch of the federal government. So Trump is actually overseeing this in some capacity. So this is literally Trump criminalizing activists and protesters.
So now, what do you expect to happen this week with these cases, and what does it look like going forward into the future?
So 2 days ago, we received some good news that the second trial group, who will begin jury selection on December 11th, have had 5 of their 8 charges dropped. So.
And all dropped to misdemeanors.
Right, so they're no longer facing felonies. They're facing 3 misdemeanors apiece. And so, a week before that, our judge ruled that, you know, that 2 of the counts, engaging in a riot and conspiracy to riot, cannot be considered felonies. So we've essentially gone from facing down a potential 75 years in prison to 60 years to now like 18 months for the current trial group. And
December 11th trial group.
The second
November
trial
15th group.
The people, yeah, the 7 people currently on trial are still facing 6 charges.
Yeah, they're still facing the 6 felony charges and the 2 misdemeanor charges. So that's why people have been starting to say 61 years, because that's the I think it's like 61 years plus like 15 days or something is the max.
Regardless, I think this is a good sign for us and for our co-defendants. It shows that the sort of house of cards that the prosecution has been building is starting to fall apart, and we're hoping that we're going to see a domino effect where these charges begin to be reduced against the vast majority of people being persecuted.
Now, with that being said, what the actual conspiracy is alleging is that, you know, the conspiracy began when someone named Dean Mads went on a podcast on It's Going Down, which is an anarchist publication, right? And talked about the protests that were happening in the wave after Ferguson, and that was the beginning of the conspiracy to riot in the United States Capitol, which there was no conspiracy to riot, right? People planned to protest that day. Specifically, Trump, who came to power promising more policing, more police militarization, promising to deport every undocumented immigrant, so akin to an ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth. The basis of the conspiracy is standard things that every protest has, like legal observers, like street medics, like a legal line, was evidence of planning that people were going to do illegal things and get arrested, right? And that's the reality, that these are things that are standard in protests, every protest.
And I think that's really the real danger here, right? Is that the danger is not just to ourselves or our freedom. The danger is to the future of civil resistance in this country, right? I mean, the government here is trying to set a precedent, a very literal legal precedent that would allow them to charge any protester or any dissident with a felony.
You're saying right now they're in the process of trying several people. In the next week or so, they're going to try several more. How long is this going to stretch out, and how long will they have people kind of like under the gun, so to speak?
I was arrested on January 20th, and my trial is not scheduled until May. This entire ordeal will take more than 16 months for me, and more than 20 months for some of us. I think the last trial on the docket right now is in October 2018.
The reality of the case is not about what a couple people did. It's about turning resistance into felonies, right? And it's specifically trying to criminalize people for participating in protests, right? When what Trump was promising as he came into power was a dystopic vision of the future, and the people that were standing up to him and resisting him were going to face the harshest consequences possible, right? The United States has a history of like authoritarian crackdowns across the world, and this is us realizing that that we need to resist those.
Okay.
I'd just like to say, as a member of the IWW, that this is not the first time in American history that our union has encountered this kind of repression. During the Palmer raids in World War I, there was a moment in time when every single member of our executive board was either murdered or in prison, and we're still here, and we've weathered these kinds of storms before, and we will again.
Okay, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining The Real News.